Hi, everyone. Welcome to PeopleMetrics Live. Today, we have a special guest speaker joining us who's going to be going over the lessons learned from creating and managing patient support services. So stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Sean McDade, founder and CEO of PeopleMetrics. It's great to be here. I'd like to welcome our guest. Patrick, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. I'm Patrick Cary. Thanks for having me, everybody. I'm working with Ultragenyx Pharmaceuticals, and I'm an associate director for the patient services team.
You know, Patrick, like in 2015, we got a call and it was from someone at Shire, and they asked, hey, have you ever heard of Patient Support Services? Because we just spun up a patient support services department for our OnePath product. And I had to admit, I had never heard of patient support services at that time in 2015. And now we fast forward to 2022, and it seems like it's such a established part of how new products go to market that we take it for granted. But here we are, and kind of love to kick it off on, how did you get here in kind of, managing and running a patient support team for Ultragenyx? And, what's been your journey to get to this point?
Sure. Thanks, Sean, for the question. So it's been a wild ride for me. I am a history major with intentions of being a professor someday. But I found myself in the economic climate of the early 2000s during the dot-com boom. And so I ended up working with two people, kind of a telecom situation. And these two people left, and one of them founded the support center for an MS medication. Okay. This was back in 2002 that one launched.
Right.
And so at that time, we were trying to figure out, what is it that we want to do here? What is the purpose? And, supporting patients is a pretty high level statement. So we just dug in and got into the weeds, and things have certainly changed, even since, 2015, as you said, but 2004 feels like lifetimes ago. But things have certainly evolved quite a bit for the better, in my opinion.
So what do you think the major changes have been in patient support services since, those early days to today? And have the challenges changed, or is it the same challenges, just we're trying to solve them in different ways?
Definitely always new challenges pop up.
Mm-hmm.
There's surely, one or two every year. Right now we're kind of in the world of dealing with copay accumulators and maximizers. This is sort of a newer topic that we're dealing with. But back then, as you mentioned, it was sort of a novelty to offer this service back in 2004.
Right.
In fact, people were quite disarmed at first because, as in this space, it's very common for a newly diagnosed patient of any disease to be getting phone calls from pharmacy, from their doctor, from their insurance, and then you add in a hub, and it becomes very important to distinguish and really set the path for the patient and what to expect. And that hasn't changed. That's always been from the beginning, best practice for sure. But over time, I think, especially in my current occupation, it's become almost a blend of social work and reimbursement work. The bonds that our people make with patients and their caregivers is far beyond anything I've ever been a part of. And I've tried to do that. I've done that myself. I've talked to over 40,000 MS patients in my career before I went into management. And every patient, is different, and you need to really support them in whatever they may need. But that basic concept hasn't changed over time. But the manner in which companies do it, the way that they hire, certainly has.
Yeah, interesting. Patrick, why don't you give us just a very high-level overview of how your patient support teams are set up now, and kind of what is your current state in terms of supporting patients?
Sure. We have support in a number of different ways through a number of different teams within patient services. So under the patient services umbrella is also market access and channel operations, which is a fairly new concept for us. It's been done in other companies in the past, but what that is allowing me to do personally is to work closely with those two teams that I've never had exposure to, and work with our data and their strategy to kind of, it's all access, right? It's either through the pharmacy you're trying to get access for the patient, or we're working with the patients directly. But then we also have field reimbursement folks. So that's patient services, but they're field-based. They have the ability to interact with patients at a neutral location. They can make sure that the physicians' offices are prepared for all the paperwork that's going to come their way when an authorization needs to be in place. And then we also have an additional team on one of our medications, which is field-based patient education, because there's a lot of moving parts with taking the medication. So all of these have come online over time. The basic structure has always been they're called Ultracare guides. And again, they're kind of a blend of social worker. In fact, quite a few of our employees have background in social work, and then reimbursement, navigating that landscape for folks. But again, the bonds that are built, it's definitely a reflection of the way that Ultragenyx hires our employees and the culture we're trying to put forth here.
Can you just comment a little bit about, I think that the bond is so important. The case managers that are interacting with your patients on a daily basis, talk a little bit about what makes a good one, and why are they so important to kind of the ultimate care for a patient these days? Because we see it in our data across all of our clients. Patients just love case managers in like almost 99% of the time, and it's just amazing to see the kind of difference they make. But I'd like to hear it from you and kind of what you see.
Yeah, we have an extremely diverse background, which is to say the folks that are case managers or Ultracare guides come from all over not just the industry, but other fields as well. So as I mentioned, we have social workers, we have tenured elementary school teachers who've made a transition, but they all have one thing in common, and that is the ability to listen and to empathize. And I know that sounds, especially if you've been in the industry, it sounds cliched, but there's a way to get there. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of this company is the manner in which we look to hire people. We're asking questions that are a little off the beaten path during the interview process. In fact, I joke a little bit because I do interviews for the IT team, for the marketing team. But my role in the panel has always been the same, which is to kind of gauge the excitement that people have about what they're attempting to join, right? And so my questions tend to focus a little bit more on, I'll tell them the story of how our company was founded and our CEO basically building this company up because of one particular patient interaction that we have. And I'll gauge the reaction. And by and large, the people, even on the IT side, that are most successful are the ones who are kind of moved and get really excited, and you can kind of read that. So there is a way to get there, but they all across the board, there's no talk time limits that we would have. We're never going to ask somebody to jump off the phone with a patient and take another call. They're there for that patient for however long is needed.
And just to the audience knows, I mean, we are talking about kind of smaller patient populations, correct, Patrick, with rare disease type therapies.
We are, and there's definitely a difference in the super rare disease space as opposed to something like multiple sclerosis, which is considered rare, but there's 600,000 patients in the country conservatively. Sure. With disease states like that, you do have the ability to do some research to connect with other patients that have MS. There's a lot out there, but for a disease state that has 200 patients or even 1,000 patients, it can become very overwhelming and scary when you start this journey. And I think that initial point of contact is where we make the best gains, starting to build that relationship with the patient.
That's great. Let's dive a little bit more deeply into your current program. I think, Alexandra, we may have a few slides, right, to kind of direct our conversation today. So your objectives, why don't you, if you could just give us some color around these objectives. I think they're really interesting. And I think the audience would benefit from kind of your perspective on your program objectives.
Sure. So the relationship that we have with PeopleMetrics has been great from the start. We knew we wanted to solicit some feedback from patients at different points during their journey. And so we've set up a kind of a 3-step process where we're engaging with patients via survey at the time, about a month into when they first start their medication, and then 6 months and 12 months. And the point there is to really make sure that we are providing that continuous support. It doesn't just fall off after a certain event happens, right? And so the 360-degree view has been something I've been talking about, since I joined. about 3.5 years ago. And from my standpoint, I work a lot with the systems that the patient services folks use to document their interactions. And we've made a ton of changes over the years here, but it's always been important for me to give them access where anybody can look at a patient record and really have a great idea of what's happened to them, because every patient journey is different, right? So the surveys that we engage with you on provide us that direct consumer feedback. Did you have enough contact or not enough? And we take that feedback and we use it. We use it for coaching, but also we want to make sure that we don't fall off. It's been my experience, not necessarily in companies I've worked for, but I've heard through the industry that over time, those support centers can kind of fall off as far as their level of intensity and their level of excitement about continuing to support patients. And we certainly don't want that to happen. It's also identifying areas where, with rare disease, there are unmet needs that are very different from somebody that might have asthma, for example. Are there challenges getting to doctor's appointments, or challenges, getting the paperwork that they have to do in order to re-up their insurance? And what we like to do is make sure that we're listening, because, as I said, there's always a new issue every year, it seems like. But it is rewarding once you find out where those gaps are, and then making an attempt to try to meet them is very important.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of emphasize a point you made that, we're not only talking to patients as they initiate therapy, you're checking in on them to help make sure they stay on therapy, right? So there's adherence check-ins that you're doing, because I talk to a lot of clients, prospects, and everybody's focused on, let's get them to initiate therapy. Like, let's get them onboarded. And then it's almost like that second step isn't thought about, but that's the most important parts, right? Because that's where the medical outcomes are seen around keeping them on therapy.
100%, Sean. With most companies, the goal is to get folks started. But as I mentioned, that support can kind of fall off. And what we've discovered, at least in my own personal journey, is that it's staying in touch with folks where you find out about those problems that haven't happened yet, but that may end up being barriers to treatment down the line if we don't take an action sooner than later. And so the only way to do that is to continue the relationship. And in fact, I think it's probably it's one of the things I love to see most with the interactions, is that the relationships continue to grow. And some of the stories are really unbelievable. Patients have shared back with us, the effects of the medication and kind of the life-changing nature of it. So it is extremely important to just keep the relationship going.
That's great. And Alexandra, I think the next slide, if we go to that one, really highlights sort of the different parts of your current program. And as you can see, right, there's like the initiation or onboarding piece, but then there are these adherence pieces as well.
Yep. And so the feedback we get is extremely valuable to us. We're not trying to toot our own horn by making sure we're collecting as many 9s and 10 scores as possible. That's not the point. The point is really to read the notes of the interactions. The scores are what they are, but just the feedback from patients. We live in a very digital age, and my company, all companies really are having to explore the different ways that the different channels that people have to reach out to us, or that we can reach out to them. And so that's why we opted in to do these surveys via email, because you will get feedback from certain folks via email or via the survey that they wouldn't necessarily tell you on the phone for whatever reason. So,
right.
And the dashboards that PeopleMetrics has built for us, and the way that we can consume the feedback is extremely user-friendly, and it's very helpful for the managers.
Now, this little framework on the left of this slide, this is in my book, Pharma Customer Experience, and it's something that I think works in every industry, but it's important to think about it, I think, in pharma too, because maybe pharma hasn't thought about themselves as experienced sort of managers. They look at themselves as product, developers, and we make a product that saves lives. So, and that's amazing, but to really get the most out of those therapies, focusing on how great companies who've delivered experiences at a very high level for a long time do it, I think is really important. And that's, around thinking about what the experience needs to be. And that's what that first step is. What do we want patients to experience, creating it, measuring to see whether it happened or not, or what happened, and then actively making changes, iterations over time to make those experiences better. And Patrick, I mean, is that something that makes sense to you and resonates to you, or how would you think of that kind of little framework there?
It does. I think the moment you stop asking for feedback is the moment you're going to doom yourself to an issue down the line. And I made mention of it earlier, Sean. If we don't build that relationship right at the beginning, and this goes for all companies, with the patient, the likelihood that you will find out and have the relationship, the close enough relationship that folks are willing to engage with you consistently, the likelihood that you'll find out about a barrier or roadblock down the line is much higher. And then we can effectively and proactively help manage through that. But it all starts with that initial relationship.
And the adverse event reporting, while there aren't a lot of them, it is really important to have that in place. I wonder if you could just comment real quickly on that. Like that's certainly something different than what we do and say, if we're helping, say, a hotel or some more traditional CX industry.
Of course. Yeah, so adverse events, for those that may not know, anything that's related to a patient taking a medication that's provided by a manufacturer or a hub, or if there's any mention of anything that is potentially an issue, no matter how insignificant, it needs to be reported. Things like this are what allows our legal team to take a nice deep breath and feel comfortable partnering with vendors, because it is in place. So as you said, we don't, not that many, and I guarantee you that most of the ones that have come through to us, the patient is fully unaware that it is actually an adverse event. It's something as benign as, I just got out of the hospital. It may have nothing to do with us, but it's still very important.
Right. And, we make sure all of our folks are trained in that. And then we work with, Ultragenyx on their process in this case to report those if there are any, and there are few, like you said, and they are often things that are nothing related to the therapy, but it's just an important for anybody thinking about putting together a program like this. That is a component that you really need to have in place. All right. And Alexandra, the next slide, I love this slide. And you talked about how empathy is so important to your case managers in a great case manager. And I think this slide really shows why that's so important to you and to everyone actually out there. Walk us through this one a little bit.
Yeah, so this is really just 3 key areas that we wanted to focus on our questions on, just to get a sense of any areas where we can improve. And again, the hiring of a company who's looking to build any sort of rare disease is again super important in my opinion, because if we have a caseworker who's very used to being empathetic with her clients, and then we have a teacher who is just now getting into the industry, they're extremely prepared, but maybe when you're working with 17-year-olds, it's a little different than a rare disease patient. So we are proud of the feedback that we've gotten, but we take all of it seriously, and sometimes, as I'm sure you've seen with other companies, it's almost the negative feedback or the slip-ups that allow you to continue to improve and not get too comfortable in what you're doing. But the dedication, the last piece, that's what will keep that relationship going and make it all the more likely that you'll find out about an issue before it really becomes a problem. For me personally, working with a medication that unfortunately can be life or death has actually reframed my entire experience, because up until this point, we've never had to deal with that type of grief before. And that definitely keeps you dedicated. You want to be prepared and extremely empathetic, because it's scary.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at these, it's this empathy piece, and of course the being prepared and dedicated is making the difference between a great experience and one that isn't a good one. And if you're thinking about what's important to your patient support hubs, the hubs that you're spinning up or you're building up now for the audience, it's just really important to think about how are we going to make sure we hire people who are empathetic, and then making sure that they're aware of just how important that kind of attribute is to the patient. and it can make or break, not only somebody's experience, but somebody's life in many ways. I mean, the stakes are super high with these, the experiences the patients have with support.
100%. And I made a groundbreaking discovery with a colleague of mine when we launched a product recently, and a very small, very rare disease. And it occurred to me that even the major prescribing facilities for this particular disease state, the physicians in those facilities had about 70 patients, 80 patients. She was covering most of the Eastern Seaboard at the time. And so it was likely that she has talked to more patients in this disease state than anybody else in the country. Because the physicians just have their own patients. She's talking to the entire Eastern Seaboard. And that I think kind of opened all of our eyes to think, yes, these folks may not have the support that an MS or cancer diagnosis, because they just can't find anybody else with their particular condition. But you've got this woman who's talked to more people than anybody, really. And she can be empathetic and relay stories that she's heard, obviously not identified, but anecdotal feedback about what other people have gone through. And what a great way to be empathetic.
That is amazing. It's a great story. I mean, in looking at this data, it just comes to mind, we did some analysis on all the data that we've gotten across all the support teams that we've worked with. And this is remarkably consistent, Patrick, with what we're seeing across the board, because we asked this preparation question pretty in some way, shape, or form on everybody's program. And, you could infer that people who are prepared to begin treatment are likely to onboard, right? Like they're likely to begin therapy. And those who say no, there's some doubt. And we see this consistently, that about 4 in 10 who have a poor experience with patient support in some way, shape, or form, whether that's because the empathy was down or they didn't feel like their questions were answered, they're not prepared for treatment. And, that has huge implications in many ways. It has implications for, monetary implications. It has implications for continuing therapy. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is if people are thinking about, do patient support services make a difference? Is it worth the trouble? I mean, it's worth everything, because that it makes having a good one or a great delivery of experiences here makes a huge difference to patients in their mindset as they begin or not begin treatment.
Absolutely. Any patient support center, in my mind, needs to make sure that we're doing whatever the best is for the patient. Our job is not to get people or force people onto treatment, because to your point, there are people that just aren't ready for whatever reason. They had a bad experience in the past, maybe conventional treatment worked for them, better in their mind, and that's fine. That's the job, is to really take what comes through the door and make the best possible outcome. If the patient is driven and the prescriber is motivated, then we're going to have some success. But with any rare disease, any disease at all, if somebody's not motivated, they're going to have some trouble. It is a great slide, Sean. Just looking at it, a little bit more closely, it makes all the difference.
Yep. Picture says it's 1,000 words on this one for sure. All right, let's move on to the key lessons learned. And you've touched on all of these, but I think it's really worth wrapping them up into what are some of the key points you would say around your lessons learned in leading patient support teams.
So this first one we have talked about, but there is one other thing I'd like to add to it, and it's hire based on compassion, dedication, and empathy across the board. It's been too common for me to see in other companies where the patient services can be motivated, they can be empathetic and dedicated. But if the rest of the company kind of puts them in a silo and says, this is your role, go ahead and do what you need to do, but we're gonna operate a little differently. I think what you're gonna find over time is that the patient services center will become a little bit jaded, thinking that they're not really as important as they hoped they would be. Whereas if you have this as a company value, a company culture that you're trying to build across marketing and all the different departments that have to interact, that's when you'll find the patient services team is pretty much front and center and admired and appreciated all the way up to our CEO. It's very clear to all of us how valued we are, and that's very unique in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would, wholly agree with that based on, all of the experiences we've had as well. And I would just add that after you hire them, it's important, and we've mentioned this before, to measure from a patient perspective whether they are being compassionate, whether they do feel dedication and the empathy piece, which you showed the data on in the last slide. Okay. And then we have our next one.
Yeah, this is very true across the board in the industry. Every journey is different. I think recognizing that, and you can never really fully be prepared for the types of light things that your patients will go through. But it could be a hurricane, it could be a blizzard. We had the thing in Texas 2 years ago with the winter ice storm. You can prepare as much as you possibly can, but having that attitude where I'm going to talk to people today, I really don't know what's going to happen, but I'm excited for it. Let's get it, and not try to cookie cut any type of experience that you're giving to the patient based on something that you've done with another patient in the past, because they're all different. They have different lives, different needs. So definitely expect that.
For sure. That's a great one.
And last but not least.
So this one, I want to personally just emphasize how important and how valuable it is to have a great relationship with the IT team. Personally speaking, my relationship with my IT team, because I do have about 4 years of business partner experience, so I speak a little bit of that language on the other side of the aisle. And so does my colleague who's on the IT side. He speaks a little bit of patient services, and we meet in the middle. But what this will allow you to do is dynamically adapt to business changing environments or patient changing environments. Part of my role is to make sure that I'm providing the tools for the team to be as efficient and effective as possible when they're talking to patients. And part of the reason I'm able to do that, at least successfully, I believe, is because when we have these business needs that come up last minute, we're able to, as a group, get together, see what's on the board, what's on the plan for the next month, 2 months, 3 months, engage with the IT team, engage with the management team, and reprioritize as needed. And then we'll build it and get it done and launch it. But oftentimes, I think in the industry, you'll see kind of you do your thing, I'll do my thing. Or no, we can't make that change for you because it will affect 5 other countries who are on the same platform. It's kind of a rigid relationship. I'm here to tell you that it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. And I can just say from kind of a PeopleMetrics angle on this and doing these programs with Ultragenyx and others, that having that strong relationship with IT makes the feedback program so much better, because if we can get a timely and accurate feed on interactions that patients have with support, we can then get the surveys out to them in a timely manner, get the feedback back in a very timely manner, so you all can get insights and take action to improve the experience.
Absolutely. And when we started, I was creating the patient list manually and dropping them on the secure server. It took me about 2 hours every time I needed to do that. And now it's been automated because, again, I went to the team with a request. And most importantly, they asked me clarifying questions about the request. They didn't just assume they knew what it was and try to build it. It was a collaboration back and forth, and now it's automated. So I'm quite grateful for that.
That's a brilliant relationship, and it's great to hear such a healthy one between IT, who may get a bad rap every once in a while in the world, but it's great to have a positive experience here.
Absolutely.
Right. That's our last slide, right, Alexandra?
That's it. And I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
So let me pull up Q&A. What was the most impactful story or patient experience that stands out to you when running these support programs?
Oh, wow, what a great question. One of my first, actually, I was a phone agent taking calls from patients, and I got a call from a newly diagnosed 26-year-old woman who was in bed in the hospital with her condition. And she began to tell me that the physician had kind of thrown 4 information kits for the 4 different medications that were available at the time and said choose, and then he walked out of the room. And so the box for my particular support center was first. She looked at the number and called, and I got it. I was 24 at the time. She was 26. So first of all, that hit home. Secondly, we were on the phone for 2.5 hours. And my manager was incredibly supportive. Said, do what you need to do. Hear her out. If she cries, she cries. You can cry with her if you want to. But that really set me on the path of feeling like I belonged in this industry. Where up until that point, it was a great job and it was exciting. But that really set me on the path of wanting to pursue this and see where I could go with it. And then, another quick side note to that, we've had patients send us pictures of just dramatic physical changes as a result of treatment, as a result of support and therapy. And when you see a little girl at her first dance recital after not being able to do so, up until she gained the support of the medication and therapy, it's pretty eye-opening and very heartwarming.
It's, Patrick, you have an amazing background. You walk the talk, came from the trenches in this, and now I was running these teams. Like, the industry is lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you, Sean. I appreciate it. I'm lucky to be here. I'll say that.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you both for taking the time to share your expertise with us. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time on PeopleMetrics Live. Take care.
Thanks all.
Thank you.